In this video, we're going to begin our instruction for circle graphs. So let's read the directions. It says, look at each circle graph and the percents if necessary and subtract from 100 to find the missing percent. So because percents are based on parts of 100, there can be several different percents in the same 100. However, all the percents must add up to 100. If one of the percents is unknown, add the known percents and subtract the sum from 100 to find the missing percent. So in a circle graph, it is a 100% circle. So we know that percents are out of 100. So we can look at the pieces that we know and subtract from 100 to find the pieces that we don't know. So if you look at the example that was done here for example A, it says, what is the missing percent? Well, we know there's 20, 40, and 30. And we know total they should be 100. So if we add together 20 plus 40 plus 30, we get 90. And then 100% minus 90% gives us 10% for the missing percentage that's there. So let's do number one together. What is the missing percent? So if I know there's 75% total, if I do 100 minus 75, that's going to equal 25%. So that's the answer that goes here. Now many of you might be able to see that this is 3/4. So if you take your pie and you cut it into fourths, this is 3/4. So the last fourth is 25%. So you may have that memorized. If not, you can just take what you know, the 75, subtract it from 100, and you're left with that 25%. So let's look at number 2. What is the missing percent? I want you to figure out what is the answer for number 2. So if we take 100 minus the 60 that we know, we are left with 40%. And that's going to be the answer. Now, what do we do whenever we have more than one pie slice? We're going to add those two together. So we have 30 plus 50 is 80%. And then we'll take 100, because that's the total, minus the 80% that we know, and we're left with 20%. So go ahead, you try number 4 on your own. So for number 4, we have 10 plus 40 equals 50%. And then we have 100 minus the 50% that we know, and we're left with 50%. Now you may not have had to do any math for this one. You could have just maybe looked at this circle and said, well, I know that's half of the pie, so I automatically know that that's 50%. That's perfectly fine too. So if you have those memorized, use that to your advantage. So let's look at the next page. So it says circle graphs can be used to represent ratios because they show the relationship between a part and a whole. So we're going to use ratios or fractions or whatever other term you want to use for that piece where you're using that fraction bar. And we're going to use that to help us understand our circle graphs. So using what we did on the first page, let's use it here. So it says the shaded section of the circle graph represents 100%, or the fraction 1 over 1. So I'm using the little line right here as my fraction bar. Because if you do 1 divided by 1, that would give you a whole 100%. Now, the shaded part, the shaded section of the circle graph represents, and I'm talking about this shaded section right here. That would be half of the circle. You could say 1/2 is the fraction. Or you could also say it's 50%. Now, if you want to do the math, 1/2, if you do the long division, is 0.5. Move the decimal to become a percent, and it becomes 50%. There we go. All right, let's move down. The shaded section of the circle graph represents, so this little corner right here. If you look at this circle and you cut it like that, this is 1 out of 4, and we can just ignore this piece. 1 out of 4, or the percent of 25%. Same thing we did above, 1/4 is 0.25 as a fraction. Move the decimal point, it becomes 25%. All right, let's look at the next one. So we're looking at this piece plus this piece. So it says the shaded section of the circle graph represents. See how this piece is a fourth? If I take this circle graph and I cut it, I have 1, 2, 3, and I'm going to ignore this line here, fourths that are shaded. 3/4 as a decimal would be 0.75, which is also 75%. All right, now this is where it starts to get a little bit tricky. And we're looking at this slice right here. We want to know how many percent that represents. So for this one, I recommend let's extend our circle graph lines. So do you see how the quarters are cut in half? So I'm going to cut this quarter in half here, and I extended this one down. So this is 1 out of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So that's 1/8. If you do the long division with 1/8, you get 0.125. Move the decimal 2 places over, you end up with 12.5 as the percent. Now, you could also look at this as a whole 25%, and I can see that it's cut in half. So I could do 25 divided by 2, and that will equal 12.5. So that's where that also can come from. So if you don't like to do the fraction, you could always just take 25 divided by 2, and that'll become your percent. And then the last one, we're talking about this piece here. So that's 2 of those 12.5s, or you can just look at it as the fourths. So you could do 2/8 or 1/4. Either one would be fine, but they both represent the 25%. Okay, let's look at the next page. So given each circle graph, determine an estimate for the fraction, decimal, and percentage. So I'm going to look at my colors. Yours isn't colored, but we can figure it out. I'm going to take my lines and I'm going to extend them so we can look at it as pieces of a fraction. And so this fourth is cut in half, so I have to cut this fourth in half as well. So there's our pie, a little fraction circle. Okay, so the color yellow. What fraction is the color yellow? Well, here's the color yellow, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 slices, so this is 1/8. The red is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4/8, or if I simplify that, that's 1/2. And you can see it's half of the circle. That little purple color there, there's 2 out of 8, or 1/4. And then the gray is the same as our yellow, so it's 1/8. And then we're going to turn those into decimals. So 1/8, or a quarter, or half of the quarter, I'm sorry. So if this represents from here to here is 25, half of that is 12.5, so we know 12.5%. So if you have that memorized, you don't have to do the long division. Move the decimal 2 places over, and I get 0.125. And that's going to be the same for this one, because they're the same fraction. Now for this one, you probably have half memorized. Half is 50%, or 0.5 as the decimal. And a fourth is 25%, if you look at the last page, and that's 0.25 as the decimal. So I want you to pause here, and I want you to do the other circle for number 2. Remember, I recommend cut it to the size of the smallest pie slice. So I'll help you cut that a little bit. There you go. So go ahead, you do the fraction, decimal, and percent for number 2. All right, so your fraction is 1/2, your decimal is 0.5, your percent is 50 because it's half of the circle. The fraction for the orange is 1/8. We've already done that one, so it's 0.125. Percent, 12.5%. It's half of a quarter. The last one was a little tricky. 3/8. When you divide that, you get 0.375, which gives us 37.5%. So that was the trickiest one on there. All right, let's scroll down. Let's practice interpreting some. So let's look at number 3, and then you can do number 4 on your own. In a survey of 100 families, 30 families preferred cheese pizza, 40 preferred cheese pepperoni pizza, 20 preferred cheese mushroom, and 10 preferred a deluxe pizza. Circle which circle graph best represents the given data. So there's 100 families, so that means the circle graph's out of 100. I know the biggest slice should be 40, because I have 30, 40, 20, and 10. The biggest slice is 40, and that's cheese pepperoni pizza. So the easiest way to do that, come down to your circles. Find the biggest pie slice. Cheese mushroom is the biggest. I don't think so. Cheese pepperoni is the biggest. That could be an answer. Cheese is the biggest? Nope. Cheese mushroom? Nope. We just found our answer, and we didn't have to do that much work. Go ahead. I want you to do number 4 on your own. All right, so 100 families again. 50 prefer Coke, 30 prefer Sprite, 20 prefer root beer as their favorite. Biggest one is Coke. This one can't be the answer. Could be that one. Can't be root beer. And it could be that one. So now for this problem, we had to go, okay, well, we know 50 is the biggest. We're down to 2 answers. 30 is the second biggest, and that's Sprite. Sprite is the second biggest here. Sprite's not the second biggest here. So it should have been that one for your answer. All right, and let's talk real quick next about how to actually make a circle graph. So when we actually make a circle graph, we're going to determine the total that's being used. We're going to write each piece of data as a ratio or as a fraction. We're going to turn each fraction or ratio into a percent. And then we're going to estimate, and we're going to use the basic sections of the circle graph that we discussed at the beginning. So your 10, your 25, your 12.5, and your 75. And you can use those to estimate. So here's our example. In Bayard Middle School, they did a survey of 100 students to see their favorite kinds of music. Complete the table and show the results of this survey in the circle graph, and make sure to include a title and a key. So what's the total? Well, there's 100 students that were surveyed total. So use the total as the denominator of your fractions. So country, there were 26 out of 100 people that liked country. There were 11 people out of 100 that liked jazz. There were 50 out of 100 people that liked rock and roll. There were 13 out of 100 people that liked other. Percents are out of 100. So 26% of people liked country. 11% liked jazz. 50% liked rock and roll, and 13% liked other. I'm getting those numbers from the numerators. Percents are out of 100, so as soon as I stuck that numerator out of 100, it turned to a percent. All right, now we have to do our circle graph. The title could be favorite kinds of music. Now, do you see how we cut your circle for you into those fourths? The best trick that we have found is use those fourths to guide you. So we know that each one of these fourths is 25%. So let's come up to our percentages up here. Is there anything that is close or dead on that we could either add 25s together, or we could have exactly 125? Well, we don't have an exactly 25 pie slice, But we do have exactly a 50 pie slice, and that's two 25s put together. So I'm going to start there. I'm going to cut my circle in half. And I recommend if you can't draw a straight line, use a straight edge. And so this is going to be rock and roll. And that's 50%. And if you want to color it, you can color it. You can say this rock and roll is blue. So you can make a key over here. You can say rock and roll. All right. So we did this one. Now there's one that's very close to 25, but not quite exactly. And that would be our country. So we know that one of these little quarters here is 25%. So we're just going to go just a smidge below it because you're really not going to be able to tell the difference between 25 and 26% because they're so close. So this is going to be country. And that's 26%. And you can make it a color if you want to. You don't have to make it color coded. So this would be country. All right, now I have a quarter left. And I know half of the quarter is 12.5%. So, are we really going to be able to see the difference between 12.5 and 13? Not really. So we're just going to slice this piece in half. And this piece looks a little bit bigger, so I'm going to say this one's other. And that's 13%. And then I'm going to say that the smaller piece of the two, that one is going to be jazz. And that's 11%. So when you make a circle graph, all you're doing is converting ratios into percentages. And once you turn them into percentages, you can place them on the circle graph in the locations that they belong to.